Welcome to another edition of Risk and Return. I'm Charlie Gasparino with my pal and partner, Bob Sloan from S3 Partners. This is a shortened edition because of the July 4th holiday, but we do want to hit some headlines, give you some of Bob's stock insights. I don't want to leave, the markets never sleep, as they say, right, Bob? Even
Well,
when they're
that's why we're doing
sleeping,
this show today. It's
even when they're
all about grinding it out.
even when they're sleeping, they're not sleeping. And but before we get into sort of the nitty gritty, and again, it's going to be a shortened version. In the old days when I was a kid, there was something known as China watchers because China was such a closed society. Mao had just started opening up Zhou Enlai with Nixon. Remember the famous Shanghai communique where Nixon actually went over there, and it was sort of the opening of China back in the 70s. But still it was hard to like figure out what was going on. And there were people that watched it to try to figure it out from afar, and they were called China watchers. You're kind of a China watcher because in many ways it is a closed society. It's a closed economy that's open in certain weird ways with us. And there's a president there, President Xi Jinping, who's kind of more of a dictator than a president, I guess you could say. Um, and he's a hardliner. Um,
Yes.
and he's involved with trade talks with Trump, which, as you know, have impacts on markets. What's going on over there? I mean, you've been smelling around, right? And by the way, you do business overseas a lot. You got stuff in Hong Kong and Shanghai and all
We
sorts of stuff.
have we have consumers of our data pretty much anywhere that is a money capital of the world. As a matter of fact, everywhere that is a money capital of the world for sure. And we watch Hong Kong very closely because it's really the Shanghai A shares, the China A shares, sorry, are very scarce, and it's very, very, very hard to track that data. The Hong Kong exchange obviously is they have an exchange, is regulated. There's a real presence there, and we watch the Hang Seng very, very, very closely, precisely for what you're saying. Images mean so much over there. Face is everything, and particularly in the way leaders portray themselves and or the party portrays their own leadership to the world. And there's been just a lot of interesting photography, a lot of interesting imagery coming out of China. Maybe there is some tumult in the party. And what we see on the screen, this is short interest. This is the short interest, by the way. It's just gone up a lot. Now the market's gone up like 35%, but short interest is up quite a bit. And it's up across the board. So if there is tumult, you have both sides of the market saying maybe there is, maybe there isn't, and there's a real tug of war there. And talking about Mao, I mean, we've got Mao right in our backyard right here, right now with Mom Donna.
We have Mao Dami.
We have Mao Donna, right? I mean, unbelievable. You know,
Zohan Mamdani, who's the Democratic nominee
I
for the
preferred
U.S.
Yao.
governor.
Give me Yao. Give me Yao, right? The big tall guy from the Houston Rockets. Give me Yao. Don't give me Mao. We'll take the Yao over the Mao any day, any day.
I would rather have Robert Mondavi, the winemaker, to be honest with you. But that's a whole other story.
The whole thing.
God, I couldn't help myself there. So, Bob, you're saying that there is a sophisticated market bet right now that Xi is on the ropes here, right?
There's certainly short interest rising as the rumors of his either health,
I
demise
know,
with
I've heard
the
that.
party,
Yes.
the rise of the military, the changing of the regimes, the farther away from the capital, all these intrigues that are there that it's very tightly controlled information. I was just there. The security apparatus there is unlike anything that you've ever seen in your entire life. So things are closely managed, and when they escape like that, I think it has meaning, and I think the markets interpret that also.
Yeah, I mean, listen, there's clearly talk about Xi not being well. There's clearly talk about and that he's negotiating with Trump on a weakened in a weakened state, right? Remember, I mean, the health of the leader is paramount here. I mean, if you recall, one of the problems with Roosevelt was at Yalta, I believe, that he wasn't very healthy, and he
No.
gave away half of Europe to Stalin, and so there's that. There's talk about massive changes in the military. There's a lot of stuff going on. We should also point out that we don't really know. I mean, this is like hard to figure out. And there's always changes in the Chinese military. There's all rearranging the deck chairs
But
on the
that's why the
F-16s.
proxies of the markets mean so much,
Yeah.
right? Because it's the only way we actually get to interpret where information is so tightly controlled, where power is so tightly held. You know, you have what, 100,000 people in the Communist Party in China, of which maybe 2,000 control 2 billion. So we need proxy mechanisms to understand what's happening within China because the information we get there is so sparse and it's so hard to understand. And that is exactly the birth of what you were saying about China watchers in the first place. That's
Well,
what we watch.
it's interesting though. I mean, the trade talks are going on with China. It doesn't seem like they're giving up the store, does it?
Who knows the details? I don't. You would be closer to that than I am. I think with a couple of
Nobody
calls.
knows. I mean, it seems
Nobody
like
knows.
they're just like sort of trudging along here, grinding it out. And I mean, listen, we've compromised tremendously on this. They've compromised a little bit. I mean, enough, I mean, we've both compromised, but it doesn't seem like anybody's operating out of a position of pure strength or pure weakness.
Well,
That's just where it is. We should point out that we told you last week there would be trade deals this week with some Asian countries. We got some of those. Vietnam, India is on the runway. Vietnam, we should have South Korea, Japan. Who knows when? That's on off. But the stuff is starting to come together on that front. Still, the big kahunas are China and the EU, and that's still not there yet.
but a lot of these countries are looking at what happened in Europe. This is a good segue to our next piece of data. They're looking at Europe and saying, okay, in April, everybody said, okay, Europe done, forget about it. They're isolated. We're going to do the tariff deals with Asia where it matters. Europe will be isolated. It's terrible. If you look at the stock market and you look at the euro, they're both very strong.
Yeah,
And there's reasons for that, right? Germany's output is is quite high. Their shift into defense spending, their ability to actually I'd say change the stance in terms of how they feel and their influence to the ECB, which is cutting rates. So all of a sudden, the main engine of the EU is on a different footing, and that's empowered the euro, and that's empowered other European stock markets, and they're really outperforming the world right now.
that's pretty interesting because the conventional wisdom is that the U.S. markets are just crushing it right now, and which they're off their lows. They're at all-time highs, but they're not so far this year. What is the S&P up?
Like 6.5%, which is way trailing Europe. So people are confusing all-time highs with market return. Yes, we're at an all-time high. Yes, that's an amazing thing. But if you just look at the actual return of the marketplace, it's below average. It's
So far this year. So
so
far
far
this
this
year.
year, it's
Yeah.
below average, and certainly trailing and lagging other major industrial markets.
Right.
So
And we should point out that so far this year, there's a trade war going on. So that's kind of like what's throttling
totally
it.
understand, but in isolation, there's a trade war for them too.
True.
And so, what is this saying? It's saying, okay, is the US losing market leadership? Is the dollar losing leadership? Is the euro becoming more of a favorite
Well,
currency?
the dollar is losing leadership, isn't it lately?
It sure is. You look at the euro is very, very strong versus the dollar.
Versus the dollar. Yeah.
Right. So, the idea that the tariff policy is going to maintain US leadership, the markets are saying, yeah, not so fast.
Tariffs have still not played out. I mean, there's conflict. There was an ADP report yesterday that was horrible in terms of private sector hiring. There was an employment report, and that on Thursday that was really bullish theoretically. So you go back and forth. It's like ping pong. We should point out that we're not going to know about these tariffs, I think, for another month. I mean, and then even then, we don't know. I mean, it's still they're all on pause. There's nothing set. So how do you know how it impacts? So, we're just
No, no one knows,
no one
right?
knows. And by the way, that's why, shows like ours are so important because we're going to help you kind of figure out, maybe get defensive on this, point out, you know, certain plays where if you want to bet certain ways, you can. Anyway, any sort of picks this week? I know this is like a light data week for you.
Yeah, it's a light data week for us. We don't have any picks this week, and we won't have any next week either. But the last 2 weeks in July, I think there's probably 80 stocks to 100 stocks in our universe that will have earnings. We will have picks then. If we don't have it, hey, that's just the way it goes, right? It's there's nothing for us to do. The models don't pick it up, and there's no real earnings releases happening around July 4th uh, here in the United States, and there's nothing elsewhere that we've seen that we thought was worth putting on the show. So, but there is one thing that's interesting. There was a news story about how the PE of the S&P is very expensive relative to Europe.
That's interesting.
Yeah, to your point about market leadership, the story is wrong.
Huh.
It's not, well, because what happened is that the Magnificent Seven is now 30% of most market leading
And
indices.
let's just unpack that for like if you just fell off your,
Yeah. So in other
Sherman
words,
truck.
the S&P is 100, and now those seven stocks are 30% of the
Right.
of the 100% weighting.
And who are
Total
they?
weighting.
Who are they?
Well, all the Mag Seven are Meta, Google,
Right. The big guys.
all the big guys, and Amazon, Microsoft, so on. So that in and of itself doesn't mean the valuation changes. It just means that those stocks are more of a percentage of the index. So to say that, hey, this indice is more expensive relative to another, that's not what happened. What happened is that the Magnificent Seven is now a bigger percentage of the index. And the valuation of those seven doesn't change. Now, if you wanted to say, well, I think 30% of that S&P index is too much. Okay. Or too little. That's fine to say that. But to say it's rich versus other indices is misleading. So if you're worried that somehow the S&P is rich relative to other indices, watch the weightings of the Magnificent Seven.
Is there any
And
way to weight it that you could kind of equalize things?
well, you'd have an equally weighted basket, but this is a cap weighted basket. And, I think that's a much better reflection of market um, behavior, right? So in Japan, for example, the Nikkei is an average basket. It's 225 stocks, and it's more or less equally weighted. And the topics is cap weighted. So we in our markets we do cap weighting almost, I think, almost exclusively. I'm trying to think if
Yeah.
there.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's true.
Yeah. So that's pretty interesting. And then the Russell 3000, if you look at, if we could bring up that chart for the Russell, this is pretty interesting because short squeezes are still a thing. And it really
Short
is.
squeezes again, huh?
Yeah. It happens all the time. So, Charlie, when we talk to institutional investors, they're really concerned with five or six things. One is, what am I versus the market? Am I alone? That's number one. Is it crowded? And versus the average daily volume, how big am I versus the total market? That's the first thing they want to know. The second thing is they're looking at volatility, and they're saying, hey, if there's too many people in this particular stock, is that good or bad for volatility? Right? The third thing they want to be able to rank and score by deciles and quintiles. They want to be able to score their own portfolio for what they think is the best stock or the worst stock, depending on how they're looking at it. And then the last thing, they want to be able to identify risk on and risk off events. And a risk on event or a risk off event, depending on how you're looking at it, which side you're playing, is a short squeeze. A squeeze is crowding, but it's also a risk off. It can be a risk off event if you're short. It can be risk on if you're playing on the other side. And we called about 7 or 8 stocks in June. We said, these stocks are very crowded. They have all the characteristics of a squeeze. And look what happened. Whether it's Chipotle, Micron, Allegro, NVIDIA, Wayfair, Texas Instruments, Capital One. Funny thing happened. The average squeeze score is, in our book in the United States, is around a 30. And these things started ticking up over the average.
Yeah,
And
look
what
at that.
happened? The average return for the month was like 6% across all these 10 names for 1 month. So these things are real. They do happen. They're not like the Loch Ness Monster where they just kind of purportedly happen. They do happen. And there's a reason why they happen. And there is a way to identify them and take advantage of them or avoid them if you have the right data or you happen to listen to our show.
Yes, and again, short term, we're talking short term. This is not for your long term investing needs, but it is something that you need a little bit of that in your portfolio. Even if I think if you're an average investor, you need some of that vol. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I'm not saying risk all your money, but there's something to be said for playing this a little bit, isn't it? Just in terms of portfolio management.
100%. And so these things are real. They are real opportunities. Professional investors play them all the time. And, the short squeeze things can be near term and they can be very long term. It's a
Let's
little,
break it down just a little bit.
it's a little different than an earnings call.
When you see those numbers, what are they telling you to do, more or less?
What they're telling you is that here's what it's telling you. It's telling you that there's probably mark-to-market losses on the short side, people that are betting against the stock. It's telling you that the amount of borrow is probably pretty expensive. And it's telling you that the ability to short that stock, you have to be able to borrow it, is probably in short supply.
So you might want to go long it.
You certainly can.
It's a way to play it.
It is a way to play this. And it's a real thing. Shorting is incredibly hard, but that's why hedge fund managers get paid 1 in 10, 2 in 20, whatever the management fee and performance fee they get paid. That's why, because shorting is really hard. That is the main difference between a mutual fund and a hedge fund, is that one side can short, the other one by prospectus and or indenture cannot.
And that's why you pay them the fees, and that's why they pay you.
Super hard to do.
They pay you outside gains, hopefully.
Yes.
So that's all debatable these days.
No, that's right. So there's these things are real. We track them. We look at them all the time. We wrote a note about it about a month ago. We thought we'd call it out and say, hey, this actually does work. There are times when um, the analytics actually are predictive, sometimes weeks in advance, sometimes even months in advance of the actual price action taking off.
Yeah, yep, yep. And S3 data is the premier data facilitator for on short interest.
At short interest and now increasingly also on a long interest. We're going to start talking about that too, because you've talked about getting some of the bigger ETF players on the show, which we'll do. That whole dynamic where 70% of any stock is held by SSGA or BlackRock or Vanguard, et cetera, that changes the way that daily stock price will react.
Yep.
Because those folks are not in the market every day. So it's a battle between the people that are in the market every day. And we've been able to show people how to measure the long side, how much is in the market every day versus the short, which is obviously what we're known for. And now you can really see where there's a tug of war, whether it skews short
And you could pick your spots.
and you can pick your spot.
We should point out we're going to have like a bunch of decent guests in the coming weeks. One of the issues here now is this is vacation time on Wall Street. People are in the Hamptons, having fun. I'm in Connecticut, so I'm totally I work through vacations, just so you
I'm
know.
with you, Charlie. I'm here.
I know you are here, and we're gonna be working through this vacation, and so but we will have more data, as these in the next couple of weeks, on particularly on short interest and some of these long plays from Bob's database. And I will keep bringing you news. Let's get to some of my headlines because I don't want to, I'd be remiss to say that nothing's going on, but something is going on. Uh, Number one, the business community in New York. I mean, listen, we're in the middle of Wall Street, right? You and I so we live, eat, and breathe this stuff. What is Wall Street obsessed with? Well, it's the markets. It's also Zohan Mandami right now. I mean, you just can't go to any place on, that where there's Wall Street executives, business people in New York, financial sector types, and not hear this guy's name since the socialist won the a socialist, Zohan Mandami, won the Democratic primary. And you know what's interesting about him? And what's fascinating to me is like just how little people knew about him. I mean,
Right.
that outside, I guess the people who voted for him, maybe the college kids or whoever his base is. I mean, people are like shocked now that he once said we need to. I don't know. There's all these clips
Seize
about
the
him
means
saying,
of production.
"Yeah, seize the means of production. We're going to buy some houses and hand them out to people." I'm paraphrasing, but he did say that. Kind of silent when. How do you feel about globalizing the Intifada? He didn't want to go there and criticize that. I mean, he really is out there, and no one seems to know. As of writing right now, I have a couple of stories in the Post that are coming out. There is building pressure to narrow get some of these mayoral candidates out, like either Eric Adams, the current mayor, or Andrew Cuomo, who is supposed to be winning the Democratic primary but lost to Mondami, who's both are going to plan to run on independent lines. Get one of them out. They both said, Cuomo said, well, maybe if there's no path to victory. I can tell you that the business community is trying to take measures into its own hands, and increasing numbers are moving into the Adams spot. I will say this, that when I say that, every time I say that to the Cuomo people, they hit me with polls showing that Adams is still has an uphill battle with Mondami, just based on he's had a very uneven mayoralty, so to speak, and that's kind of
But Charlie, when you
understating.
speak to them and they lose, when they're up double digits by their own polling, and then they come back with the same polling that says we're ahead, maybe you need a different polling.
Yeah, well, that's a whole other story. Yes, yes, and it's hard. The problem I think the Cuomo's people have is that when you say you were up by 10 points, when you did not really go on the attack in a way that was sufficient to the type of threat this guy poses to city government and the economy, when you do all that, and then now you say, oh, the other guy's unelectable, because that's what they're trying to say about Adams. I don't know if it works. So stay tuned on that. That story, this could happen in the next couple of days. I mean, there could be
One of the things that was like you know a lot of the characters involved, a lot of the people involved. They're not characters, they're people. And it just struck me as how almost passive, almost passive people were in the face of someone saying to you, right to your face, I'm going to take your home, I'm going to take your business, I'm going to turn this place into a collective. And that's what we're doing. And no one was like, the fuck you will.
yeah. I mean, it
I,
was.
I don't get it. So
I
because
mean, I asked
almost such a
Andrew.
pig, but
I've
again,
asked the
I,
Andrew Cuomo people why he kind of didn't play all that stuff up and why he didn't go more on the attack. They were like, "Well, we were up. Their excuse was we were up by 10. Why energize his base when we're up by 10?" And I said, "Okay. I mean, it's not an absurd thing to say, but it's not. To me, it was playing it way too safe." And listen, I happen to like Andrew Cuomo a lot. I think he'd be actually a decent mayor. I don't know if he can make the sale now, and maybe Adams can't win, and this is the biggest mistake ever. but I'm just telling you where a lot of people's heads are at. It's he's gonna have a hard time sort of convincing business people. And by the way, business people aren't the electorate, but they give you all the money. And if he doesn't have any money, he's going to be bankrupt. And I think my view is, if I was to predict this, I mean, as of me speaking right now, he's not out, but he could be out like this weekend. I mean, just the way I see the momentum switching. So we'll see what happens. I keep an eye on that. And this is important because listen, there's a lot writing on this. A socialist with the controlling this much of the commerce of New York and the country, which is still domiciled here in many respects, is never good. It's going to lead to an out migration of jobs and people. It's going to be a huge upheaval, because the guy is very far left. And here's what they're not telling me as well. The people in Albany in the state legislature that he needs are as far left as he is. This state is very dysfunctional right now. It might be worth, I mean, I hate to say it, it may be the solution here is to let it flush. Him come in, do all his crazy shit. We all move out, the city implodes, and you start from zero because the political class that's controlling the city, it's a one-party town, and it's increasingly that one party is Democrat, and the controlling mechanism of that one party is very left wing, increasingly so. You don't change it by beating it by 3 points. You change it by letting it implode under its own weight.
What really strikes me is a lot of this, the Occupy Wall Street came out of the financial crisis. It's kind of morphed into Mamdani over the last, let's say, 15 years. But what started that was, in my mind, you can draw a direct parallel between that and the Iraq War. And then you have very famous words. If you break it, you own it.
Yeah,
Right? That
something
was
to be said for that.
right. Right. Colin Powell, that's what he said.
I mean, populism came
This is the
out.
same thing. It's like you want to break the city, you own it. And they
Well,
don't care. They don't know anything else.
The rise of Trump clearly is directly related to that. The right wing populism that we see right now, which I agree with a lot of it. The notion that stay out of foreign wars. Remember who fights these wars. It's not rich kids. It's literally working class kids from Middle America that go fight these wars, and they came back to towns that
Well, listen,
factories are
Iraq was the
gone.
worst mistake ever made,
Right.
in the history of the country, for
It's
sure.
really bad. And then we had a financial crisis. And by the way, you could trace that financial crisis going back many years to, Bill Clinton's HUD secretary, who was first Henry Cisneros and then Andrew Cuomo, who basically started the subprime lending movement, which allowed people that really didn't have means to own homes, and they couldn't really afford it, and it bid up the price of homes, and you had a housing crisis. And those two things came together and it exploded. And Occupy Wall Street was the sort of galvanized a lot of the attention, and I covered it at the time. I went to Zuccotti Park and saw the Marxist literature and bought some stuff. They sold it to me. I think that's how Marxist they were when they were selling little posters about quoting Mao. But there was really like a more of a sort of groundswell of right wing populism that first manifested itself in the Tea Party movement and then MAGA. And I think we're lucky that the right wing populism emerged as a more potent force than because for every Mondami and AOC, they're when it really comes down to it, they're fringe players in American politics, even if he does win New York. Because this is everybody's left and moved to Florida. I mean, that's why he's going to win. There's sort of real political juice is on populism is I believe on the right. The Tucker Carlsons, the Bill Clintons, excuse me, the Donald Trumps, the Steve Bannons. Those are the people that kind of that's the dog with the tail that's wagging.
Sure.
And I think those two events clearly are still shaping our politics. They shape trade. We're talking about trade all the time, tariffs. That's why we got tariffs. It's one of the reasons. So
But what do you think? But what do you think when you see Bill de Blasio say, now Trump put out a statement saying if ICE agents in New York City are denied access by Mamdani, that he'll arrest Mamdani. And then, you know, de Blasio comes out of like hiding and says, oh, we'll put a human shield around him and we'll do this and that. It's just amazing to me where you have real problems. We have a mental health problem in New York City that they were supposed to actually fix. We spent billions of dollars. There's more people mentally ill walking around the streets of New York City than ever before.
yeah,
It's a fact. And you can just feel it walking around
why
Midtown.
are we spending money on migrants? I mean, it was just we're giving them credit
And,
cards and
you know,
stuff.
you've
I
got
mean,
good, hardworking folks, and they look around and say, here's a guy that gets a free iPhone. And then it's like this equivalency, right? Well, if we give up benefits here and it's a sanctuary city, then we have to give benefits over here. I mean, the whole rationale is a little crazy.
well, that's why I think Trump is on firm ground. I mean, so you're going to stop Trump from deporting people that are living off the welfare state, even if they work, by the way, even if they pay taxes. I mean, think about the social services they consume, because we do. You can't have open borders in a welfare state. They clog the hotel room, and they clog the emergency rooms of hospitals. And by the way, I'm not degrading these people. These are wonderful people. They're working. Most of them are not criminals. A lot of them are,
No,
but
they're
you know,
hardworking folks, and they
yeah.
all
But
they
but
want to do is have a better life. No
but
one's
we
saying,
can't afford it. And it's like when you see American vets doing without stuff. If you see stuff going on at the border where people just walking over, and you just can't have that. It's bedlam. So if Mondami wants to prevent Trump from doing that in New York, I, I mean Trump's on firm ground to arrest him, depending on how much he's an obstructionist,
it would
right?
be, we'll see. But, in last week's show, Rich Farley, the thing that really caught my attention
And we should point out Rich Farley is like an author about a book called Drop Dead on the financial crisis of the 70s and predicting how it could happen again.
right. One of the first papers I ever wrote, there was also another book that Rich and I were talking about last week, which was called The Streets Were Paved with Gold, which is by Ken Auletta. And it basically absolutely gives you a blow by blow. And I've been started to read Rich's book, which is great, by the way. And it's
Yeah, I
a
know. I'm
more up to
dipping
date
in. Yep.
version. It's a great book because once you seize the means of production, and in a modern world, that means I make up whatever revenue is needed to issue bonds so that we can fund, as Rich said, hey, we have a university system, we have a healthcare system. The city owns all these things that needs funding and has to find sources for that funding. So it just opens up a Pandora's box for, let's just say, not the best practices of how to actually go out and finance yourself.
Well, Rudy was trying to downsize
Terrible.
that and privatize it. They still haven't totally privatized it. So, and not even, not even marginally. There's still a Health and Hospitals Corporation. There's still a CUNY, state,
But what I
city
wanted to say,
universities.
sorry, I didn't get to my point, which is the thing that really caught my attention was he's got what, 500,000 votes. Generally, in a mayoral election, there's about 1.5 million people that vote. He needs like 100,000, not even 100,000 votes, and he wins.
Yep.
And that's the thing that I think if you're not scared of that, man, that's got my attention because that's
Well,
not a lot.
but let's just say some more rational candidate, Andrew Cuomo, Curtis Sliwa, um, Eric Adams beats him by 5 points. What does that mean?
It's a
There
good,
is the argument to be made, Bob, that let him win, let him destroy the city, move out, vote with your feet, and start from scratch. I hate to say it. it may be the only way to do it. That's what they did in Detroit. Detroit is a much better place right now
That
after
took
they
30
flushed some of
years.
that
That took
lunacy
30
out of there.
years.
And there were a lot of Looney Tunes who were running Detroit government, crooks and wannabe socialists, and they screwed up. And they trust me, the place is so much better right now. It's a
So,
thriving downtown.
so what is it do you think a guy like Mondami sees if you look at the amount of high-paying taxpayers that have already left? It's not like they didn't leave. They left. And billions.
Most of them, a lot of them. I don't know the breakdown. Just to be fair, I mean, I think a lot of them
But
have
there's
left.
a lot of people left, a lot of businesses left, a lot of big asset managers left. They left. Okay. That worked out so great. Let's go back for round two. I mean, it's just
I think it's going to happen. I mean, I think it's so
crazy.
easy to work for me to work from here in Connecticut and not be a New York City resident and come in a couple of days a week and do what I have to do with Fox and and do our stuff here and file my stuff for the New York Post from here. I mean, it's just
When you talk about Detroit, that was a generation. That was like a lost generation. More too.
it was. And between Coleman Young, who ran it in the 60s through the 2010, we're talking, it was a sharp decline, and then it hit rock bottom. I think they declared bankruptcy, they defaulted on their debt, and then it started to rebirth. And you do have like sane people running the show there now. You have partnership with the business community that takes pride in downtown. I've been there. I mean, listen, still Detroit's still rough in a lot of places, but it's a much better place than it was. You know what I'm saying? And its fiscal house is more or less getting in order right now.
But
But New
growing
York
up,
is,
but you grew up in New York City. I grew up in New York City.
before people compare me to AOC. I grew up, and saying I grew up in the Bronx, I grew up in Yorktown
I don't think anybody's going to make that mistake. I don't think you have to worry about that, Charlie.
I'm
we have
proud.
a lot
Listen,
of
when I
disclosures
don't
on this
understand,
show.
just so you know, if we're going to diverge for AOC and where she grew up now, I don't understand why it's so bad to say you grew up in Yorktown Heights. I mean, I came from some crappy little house. My father put down, like, I don't know, 20% on $16,000. It was in front of the UPS plant and the town dump. He worked a couple jobs. I went from there to the Wall Street Journal, to Fox News, to Risk and Return. I think I did okay. You know, AOC came from some little house in Yorktown. She was born in the Bronx like me, and then she went from there to Congress.
Right.
What is wrong with that?
Not a damn thing.
I just don't get it. I don't get it.
Not a damn thing. As a
I-
matter of fact, on July 4th, it's the most American thing.
It sounds so American. So
It is the
I would
most
say,
American thing.
Mrs. AOC or Miss AOC. She's not married.
It's the most.
Embrace your inner Yorktown. By the way, we were the Cornhuskers, just so you know. I guess we should have ended on that upbeat note. What do you say, Bob?
Listen, this is still the greatest country
It is.
ever in the history of mankind. We love this country. We want to see the best. And if Mondami becomes mayor, I don't want to see it happen, but we'll wish him that he takes care of New York City, because he's got the greatest city in the world with the greatest and most industrious people, the best minds, the most motivated, the most highly energetic. You have a gift. Don't waste it.
And because this is a great country and we have the First Amendment, Mr. Mondami, you're going to have people like me breathing down your neck 24/7.
Well, we'll talk about it here.
If you screw this up, and Bob,
yeah, don't screw it up.
it will be all over you like white on rice, because that's just the way we roll. Anyway, I want to say happy 4th of July. Enjoy your family. Enjoy this great country. Bob, any parting words?
We love this country. Love you, Charlie. And
Love you, Bob.
love the United States of America. Happy 4th of July. We'll see you next week.
See you next week.